Two men in dark suits walked through the emergency department doors at 2:47 a.m. They didn't stop at registration. They didn't ask directions. They moved like people who already knew exactly where they were going. The taller one showed credentials to the charge nurse. His voice carried across the quiet corridor. "We need scalpel. Now." For more stories like this, subscribe. 14 hours earlier, Dr. Marcus Aldridge stood at the scrub sink, beside a first-year resident he didn't trust. He'd watched her for 6 weeks now, and something about her precision bothered him in ways he couldn't articulate. "Dr. Kirova," he said, not looking at her. "Roll up your left sleeve." Lena Kirova's hands paused over the iodine dispensing. Her gray-green eyes met his in the mirror above the sink. "Sir?" "Your sleeve. Roll it up properly." She did. The surgical scar ran from her wrist to mid-forearm, pale and clean. The kind of scar that came from something sharp moving fast. Aldridge studied it through the reflection. What kind of first-year resident already has scars like a field medic? Kitchen accident during undergrad. Her voice stayed level. Broken glass. Glass doesn't cut in straight lines. It does when you're trying to catch it. He turned to face her directly. She was 34, but listed herself as 28 on her residency application. He'd checked. Twice. Her file showed a medical degree from a university in Prague, followed by what she called humanitarian work in undisclosed locations, then suddenly appearing in their surgical residency program with recommendations from people who wouldn't return his calls. "You've been here 6 weeks, Aldridge said. "You perform routine procedures faster than my 3rd years. Your suturing technique is flawless but unconventional. You don't hesitate. You don't second-guess. You move like someone who's done this 1,000 times. I prepare extensively. Preparation doesn't teach muscle memory." Behind them, the OR door opened. Dr. Priya Mehta, a 3rd-year resident, stepped in for the gallbladder case they were about to begin. "Dr. Kirova, you're scrubbing in?" Priya's tone carried surprise. Aldridge usually kept first-years in observation roles. "She's taking the lead," Aldridge said, still watching Lena. "Consider it a test." Lena dried her hands with deliberate care. She moved efficiently, economically, like someone trained to conserve energy for when it mattered. Priya moved beside her at the sink. As Lena pulled on her surgical gloves, Priya noticed her hands. No tremor, no hesitation, the fingers moved with practiced certainty. "Those sutures you did yesterday on the appendectomy," Priya said quietly. "Those were interrupted sutures, military style. They're just sutures. I grew up on Fort Bragg. My father was an army surgeon. I know what combat medicine looks like." Lena said nothing. She adjusted her surgical mask and walked into the operating room. The patient was already under. A routine laparoscopic cholecystectomy. Inflamed gallbladder, otherwise healthy patient. Textbook procedure. Expected duration, 90 minutes. Lena positioned herself. Her eyes scanned the instrument tray once, cataloging everything. "Scalpel," she said. The scrub nurse placed it in her hand. The first incision was perfect. Precise depth, exact location, minimal bleeding. Aldridge watched from across the table. He'd performed this procedure hundreds of times. He knew every step, every potential complication, every shortcut residents tried to take. Lena took none of them. She moved through the procedure with rhythmic efficiency. Her commands were quiet, clear, anticipated. She asked for instruments before the nurse could predict them. Her movements eliminated wasted motion. Priya assisted, trying to keep pace. "Retractor? Not yet. Suction first. Left side, there's going to be more fluid than the scan showed." She was right. The suction cleared exactly what she predicted. Aldridge checked the clock. 20 minutes in, they were already approaching what should be the halfway point. "Dr. Kirova, you're moving too fast. Vitals are stable, bleeding is minimal. Speed isn't the same as recklessness." He couldn't argue. Everything she did was technically perfect, but the speed bothered him. First years didn't move like this. They hesitated. They double-checked. They asked questions. She did none of those things. 35 minutes into the procedure, Lena paused. Her head tilted slightly, like she was listening to something no one else could hear. "Dr. Aldridge, do you smell that?" He inhaled. "Antiseptic. Blood. The usual OR sense. Smell what?" "Something's off. The tissue around the gallbladder. Look at the discoloration." She adjusted the camera angle. Aldridge leaned closer to the monitor. "Monitor." That's within normal range for inflammation. It's not inflammation, it's early peritonitis. She turned to the anesthesiologist. Check the white blood cell count again. Run a full sepsis panel. Dr. Kirova. Aldridge's voice hardened. You don't order panels without consulting the attending. This is a routine procedure. Stay focused on the task. Sir, if I'm right and we don't catch it now, you're a first year. Stick to what you know. Lena's hands stilled for exactly 2 seconds. When she moved again, her technique hadn't changed, but something in the air had shifted. She finished the procedure in 41 minutes total. The gallbladder was removed, the incisions closed with those same military-style sutures Priya had noticed. The patient was wheeled to recovery. Aldridge stripped off his gloves. Fast doesn't mean good, Dr. Kirova. No, sir. Good means good. Fast is just efficient. She left the OR without waiting for dismissal. In the scrub room, Priya caught up with her. Lena, wait. How did you know about the peritonitis? I didn't. I suspected. Based on what? A smell? Pattern recognition. That's not an answer. Lena turned to face her. For the first time, Priya saw something behind those gray-green eyes, something that looked like exhaustion that went deeper than missed sleep. It's the only answer I can give you, Lena said quietly. 2 hours later. The lab results came back. The patient's white blood cell count was elevated. The sepsis panel showed early-stage infection. A CT scan revealed undiagnosed Crohn's disease with microperforation of the bowel. Lena had been right. Priya found Aldridge in his office. She held the lab printouts. She knew, Priya said. Before any of this came back, she knew. Aldridge took the papers, read them twice. Luck. That wasn't luck, that was experience. She's 28 years old. Her file says 28. Her hands say something different. Aldridge looked up sharply. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that whoever Dr. Lena Kirova says she is, she's done this before. A lot. Somewhere that taught her to recognize things we miss. In the residents' locker room, 3 surgical residents changed out of their scrubs. They'd all heard about the gallbladder case. 41 minutes, one said. That's impossible for a first year. She's been watching videos, another offered, practicing on simulation software. Nobody learns to move like that from videos, the third said. I watched her through the gallery window. She didn't hesitate once. Not once. That's not simulation training. Down the hall, Lena sat in the residence lounge reviewing files for the next day's cases. Her encrypted phone buzzed once. She glanced at the screen, read the message, deleted it. The text had been brief. Situation developing. Stay ready. She put the phone away and went back to studying patient charts. If you want to see how Dr. Kirova performs surgery that will rewrite trauma protocols, make sure you subscribe to Emergency Heroes Stories, because what happens in the next few minutes will leave you speechless. Where are you watching from? The locker room at 6:15 in the morning smelled like coffee and disinfectant. 4 residents clustered near the benches, voices low but animated. She diagnosed Crohn's by smell, the youngest one said. That's not normal. Pattern recognition, another countered. She said so herself. Pattern recognition requires patterns. She's been here 6 weeks. How many gallbladder cases has she even seen? Dr. Priya Mehta pulled on her white coat, listening. She'd grown up around military medicine. Her father had trained field surgeons at Fort Bragg for 20 years. She knew what combat-trained hands looked like. She'd seen them her entire childhood. Lena Kirova had those hands. Maybe she's just gifted, Priya offered, closing her locker. Gifted is one thing. This is something else. The resident lowered his voice further. I heard Aldridge requested her full file from administration. He thinks something doesn't add up. What doesn't add up is that she's better than most of the attendings, Priya said. Maybe that's what bothers everyone. She left before they could respond. Morning rounds began at 7. 12 residents and 4 attending physicians moved through the surgical ward, stopping at each bed. Aldridge led as always, with Lena positioned at the back of the group where first years belonged. They reached the patient from yesterday's gallbladder surgery. The man was sitting up, eating breakfast, looking healthier than he had any right to be, given what they'd discovered. Mr. Chen, Aldridge addressed him. How are you feeling? Great. Actually, the doctor said you caught something during surgery. Something. Thing serious. We identified some complications, yes. Aldridge glanced at Lena across the group. Early intervention made the difference. I want to thank whoever noticed it. The nurse said it was the young doctor, the one who did my surgery. Every resident turned to look at Lena. She kept her eyes on the patient chart in her hands. Just doing my job, Mr. Chen. Well, you saved my life doing it. Aldridge moved the group to the next room. In the hallway between patients, he positioned himself beside Lena. Lucky catch yesterday. Wasn't luck. Then what was it? Experience. You're a first-year resident. What experience? She met his eyes, the kind you get when you pay attention. They entered the conference room for the morning briefing. 40 people packed into a space meant for 30. Aldridge took his position at the front, pulling up the day's surgical schedule on the projection screen. Today we have 6 scheduled procedures and, given our recent census, we should expect at least 3 emergency cases. He scrolled through the list. Dr. Morrison, you'll take the hip replacement. Dr. Patel, the cardiac valve repair. Dr. Akurova, he paused, let the name hang in the air. You'll observe in the gallery. No scrubbing in today. Lena didn't react, didn't argue, just nodded once. Priya leaned toward her. That's punishment for being right. That's hierarchy. After the briefing, residents dissipated to their assignments. Aldridge caught Lena before she reached the door. My office. 5 minutes. She arrived in 4. His office was precisely organized, diplomas covering one wall, medical journals stacked with geometric precision on his desk. Sit. She remained standing. Aldridge opened a file folder. I've been reviewing your application materials. Medical degree from Charles University in Prague. Top of your class. Then 6 years of what you described as humanitarian medical work. No specifics. No organizational affiliations listed. No verifiable references. I worked in remote areas. Record keeping wasn't always possible. Remote areas where exactly? Where I was needed. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have. He leaned back in his chair. You know what I think? I think you're hiding something. Your technique isn't normal. It's too refined, too precise, too fast. You move like someone who's performed procedures under pressure I can't even imagine. Your suturing style matches military field protocols. That scar on your arm didn't come from broken glass. Lena's expression didn't change. Is there a question in there, Dr. Aldridge? Where did you really train? I told you. Prague, then fieldwork. Fieldwork doing what? Medicine. You're being deliberately vague. I'm being appropriately private. His phone rang. He ignored it. It rang again. Answer it, Lena said quietly. It's going to be important. He stared at her. How would you know that? Because it's 11:47 on a Tuesday morning, and your ER is already overwhelmed. When administration calls attendings during morning rounds, it means something bad is coming. He picked up the phone, listened. His face went pale. How many? Pause. Christ, all right. Mobilize everyone. I'm coming now. He hung up, looked at Lena. Mass casualty incident. Bridge collapse. Multiple vehicles. 40+ casualties incoming. Every available surgical team to the ER immediately. I'll get changed. You'll stay in the gallery where I assigned you. With respect, sir, you're going to need every pair of hands you have. What I need are experienced surgeons, not first-years who think they know more than they do. Before Lena could respond, the overhead paging system crackled to life. Trauma alert. All surgical staff report to emergency department. Repeat. All surgical staff to emergency immediately. This is not a drill. The hallway outside Aldridge's office erupted. Residents running. Attending physicians moving with controlled urgency. The organized chaos of a hospital preparing for war. Aldridge stood. You can observe from Trauma Bay 4. Don't touch anything. Don't get in the way. Yes, sir. They moved together through the corridors. The emergency department had transformed in minutes. Gurneys lined the walls. Nurses checked equipment. The trauma bays stood ready. Lights bright, instruments laid out. The first ambulance arrived at 11:53. The paramedics wheeled in a man in his late 30s, Marine Corps insignia tattooed on his visible forearm. Captain James Reese, according to the chart. Crush injury from falling concrete. Conscious, but in severe pain. Trauma Bay 4, the charge nurse directed. Aldridge grabbed Lena's arm. That's yours to observe. Stand in the corner. Watch. Learn. Do not interfere. Refre. He rushed to Trauma Bay 1, where the critical cases were being directed. Lena entered Bay 4. 2 nurses were already working, cutting away the patient's clothing, establishing IV access, hooking up monitors. Captain Reese's eyes found hers through the pain. Something in his expression shifted. Recognition, maybe, or confusion. "Ma'am," he managed. "Have we met?" "I don't think so. You look familiar." The attending physician rushed in. Dr. Sarah Chen, a fourth-year resident serving as senior on this case. She glanced at Lena. "You're observing?" "Yes." "Then observe quietly." Dr. Chen examined the patient. "Possible pneumothorax. Get me a chest x-ray. Someone page respiratory." Lena watched. The patient's breathing was labored but not critical. His vitals were stable. But something in the way he held his left side, the slight discoloration already forming. The pattern of his pain responses triggered recognition in her trained eye. She'd seen this before. Not in a hospital. Somewhere else. Somewhere with dust and heat and the sound of helicopter rotors. "Dr. Chen," Lena said quietly. "His spleen. What about it?" "I think it's bleeding. Internally. The impact pattern suggests delayed rupture. His vitals are stable. They won't be. Not for long." Dr. Chen turned to face her fully. "You're a first year. You're here to observe. Not diagnose. I understand, but..." "No buts. Step back." Lena stepped back, watched the clock, watched the monitors, watched Captain Reese's breathing pattern change, subtle but definite. At 11:58, his blood pressure dropped. Not dramatically, just enough. At 12:01, it dropped again. At 12:03, the monitor alarms began to scream. Dr. Chen moved fast, but Lena was faster. BP dropping, 60/30. The nurse's voice stayed professional despite the alarm in her eyes. "Get me an ultrasound," Chen ordered. "Now." Lena was already moving to the supply cabinet. She pulled the portable machine, wheeled it to the bedside, had the probe ready before Chen finished scrubbing gel on the patient's abdomen. Chen looked at her, surprised, but said nothing. She pressed the probe against Captain Reese's left side. The screen showed exactly what Lena knew it would. Free fluid in the abdominal cavity. Dark, pooling. The spleen had ruptured. "Jesus," Chen breathed. "Internal bleeding. He needs surgery, now." She reached for the phone to page the attending. Lena's hand stopped her. "There's no time. By the time they prep an OR and get him upstairs, he'll be in shock." "What are you suggesting?" "We do it here. Emergency splenectomy. Trauma Bay protocol." Chen stared at her. "You're insane. We don't have." "Yes, we do. This bay has everything we need. I've done this procedure before. You're a first year. I'm a surgeon, and he's dying." Captain Reese's eyes had started to close. His skin had gone pale, lips losing color. The monitor showed his pressure continuing to drop. Chen looked at the screen, at the patient, at Lena, making a calculation that went against every protocol she'd been taught. "If I let you do this and it goes wrong, we're both finished. If we don't do this, he's finished." Chen grabbed the phone. "I need Aldridge in Trauma 4, right now. He's an emergency thoracotomy in Bay 1. Can't leave." "Then get me anyone. We have internal bleeding that needs..." Lena was already pulling on sterile gloves. "We're out of time for permission." She positioned herself at the table. "I need a scalpel, betadine, retractors, suction, and 4 units of O-negative blood." The nurses looked at Chen. Chen looked at the monitor. The patient's pressure had dropped to 50/20. "Do it," Chen said. "But I'm assisting, and if this goes sideways, I'm taking over." "Understood." Lena's hands moved with mechanical precision. Betadine spread across the surgical field in seconds. The scalpel appeared in her palm. She didn't look at it, didn't check it, just knew it was there by weight and balance. "This is a midline laparotomy. Fast access, maximum visibility. I'm going through the linea alba to avoid muscle bleeding." The first incision was perfect, straight, deep enough. Not too deep. Blood welled up immediately. Dark venous blood. Suction. The nurse complied. The field cleared. Lena's hands disappeared into the abdomen, moving by touch as much as sight. "Spleen is shattered. Capsule completely disrupted. I'm going to need to remove it entirely." Her fingers found the splenic artery, clamped it. The bleeding slowed dramatically. Chen watched, transfixed. "Where did you learn to move like that?" "Later. Retractor." "I need visualization on the posterior attachments." Chen positioned the retractor. Lena worked with both hands now, separating tissue. Sue planes, identifying structures, moving with the kind of confidence that only came from repetition. She'd done this surgery 43 times before, twice under mortar fire, once in a helicopter, 7 times in field hospitals that weren't really hospitals at all, but she couldn't say any of that. Ligating the splenic vein, clamp. The instrument appeared. She tied off the vessel with rapid throws, the knots perfect, the tension exact. Captain Reese's vital signs began to stabilize, pressure climbing slowly, heart rate decreasing from its panicked rhythm. "He's responding," the nurse said, relief flooding her voice. "Not done yet. Still have to remove the spleen and check for collateral damage." Lena isolated the organ, severed the remaining attachments, lifted it free. It was destroyed, torn nearly in half by the blunt force trauma. Pancreatic tail looks intact. No kidney involvement. Left diaphragm is bruised but not perforated. She began the closure, layer by layer. Peritoneum, fascia, subcutaneous tissue. Her sutures were those same military-style interrupted stitches Priya had noticed before. Precise spacing, perfect tension, faster than anyone in that room had ever seen. The entire procedure took 31 minutes from first incision to final stitch. Lena stepped back, stripped off her gloves. Her hands were completely steady. Captain Reese's eyes fluttered open. His color had returned. The monitor showed normal sinus rhythm. Blood pressure, 100/60, and rising. Chen stared at the closed incision, then at Lena, then back at the incision. That was impossible. That was necessary. Nobody performs the splenectomy in 31 minutes. The fastest I've ever seen was 90. Speed isn't the goal. Survival is. The trauma bay door opened. Dr. Aldridge stood there, still in blood-stained surgical gown, looking at the scene. The closed incision, the stable patient, the instruments laid out in perfect post-surgical order. "What happened here?" Dr. Chen found her voice. "Ruptured spleen, emergency splenectomy. Dr. Kirova performed it. You led a first year. I didn't let her do anything. She saved his life while I watched." Aldridge approached the table, examined the sutures, checked the patient's vitals. Read the operative notes Chen had been frantically typing. 31 minutes. "Yes, sir." From diagnosis to closure. "Yes, sir." He looked at Lena. She met his eyes without flinching. "How?" "Training." "What kind of training teaches you to perform like this?" Before Lena could answer, Captain Reese spoke, his voice weak but clear. "That technique, the way you isolated the splenic artery." He paused, breathing carefully. "That's JSOC protocol, Joint Special Operations Command. I've seen it before. In Afghanistan, combat surgeons use that approach when they don't have time for conventional methods." The room went silent. Aldridge's eyes never left Lena's face. "JSOC protocol. I studied extensively," Lena said quietly. "Multiple approaches, multiple scenarios. Nobody studies their way into muscle memory like that." Captain Reese was still watching her. "Ma'am, I know I've seen you before. Not here, somewhere else. Your hands, the way you move." "I don't think so, Captain." Helmand Province, 2019. Field Hospital outside Camp Leatherneck. His eyes widened with recognition. "You were there. You operated on my platoon sergeant, sucking chest wound from an IED. Everyone said he was gone. You brought him back." Lena's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. A microsecond of tension. "I've never been to Afghanistan. You had shorter hair then, but I remember your hands, those exact sutures. You told him breathing was optional, but living wasn't. He survived, because of you." Aldridge stepped closer. "Dr. Kirova, I'm going to ask you one more time. Where did you train?" The overhead speaker crackled before she could respond. "Trauma alert. Incoming gunshot wounds. Federal security detail. Multiple casualties. ETA 3 minutes. All available surgical teams stand by." Aldridge's radio squawked. The ER charge nurse's voice came through, tight with tension. "Dr. Aldridge, you need to come to the ambulance bay, now. FBI agents are asking for clearance. They're saying this is a federal case. They're requesting a specific surgeon." "Which surgeon?" There was a pause, background voices, then the nurse again. "They're not asking by name. They're asking for someone by code name. They're asking for Scalpel." Every person in Trauma Bay 4 turned to look at Lena. Her encrypted phone buzzed in her pocket. Once, twice, 3 times, the emergency pattern. Aldridge's voice was barely a whisper. "Who are you?" Outside, sirens grew louder. Multiple vehicles. The organized chaos of a federal motorcade arriving at a civilian hospital. Lena pulled off her surgical cap. Her ash-blonde hair fell around her shoulders. For the first time since she'd arrived at Metropolitan General 6 weeks ago, she looked like exactly who she was. Someone who left that life behind, she said quietly. Until right now. Lena walked toward the ambulance bay like she was walking into a memory she'd tried to bury. Aldridge followed 3 steps behind, Chen beside him, both trying to process what they'd just witnessed. The automatic doors opened to controlled chaos. 4 black SUVs formed a perimeter around 2 ambulances. Men in suits with earpieces stood at precise intervals. FBI windbreakers mixed with Secret Service insignia. And in the center of it all, a tall woman in her early 40s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. Agent Elena Torres, CIA Operations Directorate. Lena stopped walking. For a moment, the hospital sounds faded. Traffic, sirens, radio chatter. All of it became background noise to the single thought running through her mind. They found me. Torres saw her. No recognition showed on her face, but her shoulders relaxed a fraction of an inch. The kind of tell only people who'd worked together in the field would notice. "Dr. Kirova," Torres said, her voice carrying authority that made even the FBI agents straighten. "We need you." Aldridge pushed forward. "Excuse me, who are you and what's happening?" Torres pulled credentials from inside her jacket. The badge said Federal Bureau of Investigation, but the identification number sequence was wrong. Too many digits. The kind of wrong that meant something else entirely. "Special Agent Torres, we have a critical patient requiring immediate surgical intervention. He's been shot. Twice. Once in the shoulder, once near the heart. We need a trauma surgeon with specific clearance." "This is a civilian hospital," Aldridge said. "We have trauma surgeons. I'm the chief of surgery. I can." "With respect, doctor, you can't. This patient is carrying classified intelligence. The injuries require someone with federal security clearance and combat surgical experience. We were told Metropolitan General had someone matching those qualifications. We don't have anyone with. You do." Torres looked directly at Lena. "Dr. Lena Kirova, former Officer Kirova. CIA Special Activities Division. 8 years of service. 47 countries. Medical clearance level 4. Codename, Scalpel." The words hit the gathered crowd like a physical force. Residents and nurses who'd followed from inside the hospital stood frozen. Dr. Mehta's hand covered her mouth. Dr. Chen made a small sound that might have been a laugh or might have been disbelief. Aldridge turned to Lena. "Is this true?" Lena's gray-green eyes stayed on Torres. "I left 3 years ago. Your clearance hasn't expired, and right now, that man in the ambulance is dying. He's a Russian defector, Mikhail Volkov, 28 years old. He's been providing intelligence on planned attacks against U.S. infrastructure. Someone tried to kill him 40 minutes ago. If he dies, so does everything he knows. There are other surgeons with clearance. Not within reach, not in time. The bullet near his heart is fragmenting. Every minute we wait, cases migrate closer to his cardiac tissue. This isn't a request, Lena. This is the scenario we trained you for." Lena felt the weight of every eye on her. Aldridge's confusion and anger. Priya's shock. Captain Reese watching from a wheelchair someone had brought him. Recognition and respect on his face. The other residents looking at her like she'd become a stranger in the space of 5 minutes. "I can't," she said quietly. "I'm not that person anymore." Torres stepped closer, lowering her voice so only Lena could hear. "You were always that person. You just tried to pretend you weren't. That diplomat in Crimea, the one you think you failed, that wasn't on you. You know it wasn't. But this man, if you don't help him, his death will be." Lena's hands closed into fists. Opened. Closed again. She'd spent 3 years trying to become someone else. 3 years of residency applications and careful lies and hiding the muscle memory that kept trying to surface. 3 years of believing that if she could just be a regular doctor, in a regular hospital, treating regular patients, maybe the nightmares would stop. They hadn't stopped. The ambulance doors opened. 2 paramedics wheeled out a gurney. The man on it was unconscious, pale, breathing through an oxygen mask. Blood soaked through the pressure bandages on his chest and shoulder. The monitor showed vitals that were bad and getting worse. Lena looked at him and saw every patient she'd ever lost. Every soldier who died on her table. Lay in places without names. Every impossible case where she'd been the last option, and the last option hadn't been enough. But she also saw every patient she'd saved, every person who'd walked away from her table when everyone else had given up. Every life that continued because she'd refused to accept that some things were impossible. "If I do this," she said, still looking at Volkov, "I want full disclosure. No more secrets. My colleagues deserve to know who I am." Agreed. "And when this is over, I go back to being a resident. No recruitment attempts. No pressure to return to operations." Also agreed. Lena turned to Aldridge. His face was a mixture of betrayal and bewilderment. "I'm sorry I lied. About my age, my experience, my background. But everything I did in that trauma bay today was real. Captain Reese is alive because of training I received serving my country. If you want me to leave after this, I'll understand. But right now, I'm asking permission to save this man's life using every skill I have, no matter where I learn them." Aldridge looked at her for a long moment. Around them, federal agents waited. Inside the ambulance, monitors beeped with increasing urgency. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. "You'll need a team," he said finally. "I'll need the best team you have. Dr. Chen, your second chair. Dr. Maida, anesthesiology support. Get Trauma OR2 prepped immediately. And someone get me every surgeon in this hospital who has experience with cardiac proximity injuries." People moved, the organized chaos of a hospital mobilizing for the impossible. Torres handed Lena a tablet. His medical file. Everything we know about the attack. The shooter used a specific ammunition type designed to fragment on impact. You're going to be removing pieces smaller than rice grains from tissue around his heart. If even one piece migrates into cardiac muscle, he arrests. I know. Lena scrolled through the file, her trained eye cataloging injuries, complications, the narrow window of survival. How long ago was he shot? 43 minutes. Then we're already behind. Get him into OR2. I need 15 minutes to review his scans and plan the approach. She started to walk away, then stopped, turned back to Torres. "The truth about Crimea. You said it wasn't on me. What did you mean?" Torres glanced at the federal agents around them, calculating what could be said in front of witnesses. "Later. After you save this man's life. Then we'll talk about what really happened that night." Lena nodded once and disappeared into the hospital. Subscribe and comment where you're watching from, because what Lena does next will challenge everything you think you know about modern medicine. The surgery she's about to perform has never been attempted in a civilian hospital. The techniques she'll use aren't taught in medical schools. And the truth about her past is about to reshape everything her colleagues thought they knew about the quiet first-year resident who never made mistakes. Inside Trauma OR2, nurses laid out instruments most of them had never seen used: microforceps, specialized retractors, magnetic probes for metallic fragment location. Chen and Maida scrubbed in, both silent, both processing the revelation that had just exploded their understanding of reality. And in the observation gallery, Aldridge stood beside Captain Reese's wheelchair, watching preparation for a surgery that shouldn't be possible, performed by a woman who shouldn't exist. "Is she really that good?" Aldridge asked quietly. Captain Reese smiled despite his pain. "Sir, she's better." The observation gallery filled with people who had no official reason to be there but couldn't stay away. Residents, attending physicians, nurses on break, even hospital administrators who'd heard whispers of something extraordinary about to happen. Aldridge stood at the glass, arms crossed, watching Lena review CT scans on the surgical theater's display screens. She'd been studying them for 12 minutes, her eyes tracking the fragments with an intensity that felt almost predatory. "She's mapping every piece," Priya said quietly beside him, "planning the extraction sequence before she even makes the first incision. That's what good surgeons do. Good surgeons take an hour to plan something like this. She's doing it in minutes." Below, Lena turned from the screens. She looked up at the gallery, found Aldridge's face among the crowd, and held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she nodded once and turned to her team. The microphone in the OR carried her voice clearly. "Dr. Chen, you're on retraction and suction. Dr. Maida, I need you monitoring cardiac rhythm constantly. Any irregularity, any change, you call it immediately. This patient has fragment migration risk, which means we're working against time and physics. Questions? Chen and Meta shook their heads. Then let's begin. The first incision was different from anything Aldridge had seen in 30 years of surgery. Lena didn't use the standard approach. Instead, she made a modified thoracotomy that gave her access to both the shoulder wound and the cardiac proximity area through a single entry point. That's not standard protocol, someone in the gallery whispered. That's not civilian protocol, Captain Reese corrected from his wheelchair. That's tactical medicine, maximum access, minimum trauma, designed for field conditions when you don't have time for multiple approaches. Lena's hands moved into the chest cavity. The monitor showed Volkov's heart beating, steady but weakened. Around it, scattered like deadly stars, were the fragments Torres had warned about. I'm counting 17 visible pieces, Lena said, likely more embedded in tissue. Largest fragment is 0.7 centimeters, currently lodged between the third and fourth ribs. Smallest are barely visible. Those are the dangerous ones. She worked in silence for several minutes, her movements precise and economical. Each fragment she removed went into a separate sterile container. Evidence. Every piece would be cataloged, analyzed, used to build a case against whoever had tried to kill this man. But that wasn't Lena's concern. Her concern was the piece she couldn't see yet. The one she knew was there because she'd seen this injury pattern before. Baghdad, 6 years ago. A translator who'd been shot with the same ammunition type. She'd found the hidden fragment lodged against his pericardium, invisible on initial scans because it was shadowed by bone. She'd almost missed it. Almost. The translator had lived, but it had been close. Dr. Mehta. Tilt the fluoroscopy 15 degrees lateral. I need a different angle. The imaging adjusted, and there it was. A fragment the size of a grain of rice, tucked behind the ascending aorta, pressed against the outer layer of the heart itself. Found you, Lena breathed. Found what? Chen asked. The one that would have killed him. It's not showing on the standard views. Look here. She indicated the screen. See that shadow? That's not a shadow. That's a fragment that migrated during transport. It's resting against the epicardium. Any significant movement, any jarring, and it punctures through. Aldridge leaned forward in the gallery. Even from this distance, he could barely see what she was indicating. The fact that she'd found it at all was remarkable. How do you extract something in that position? Chen asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. Very carefully. I need the magnetic probe, the small one. Designed for vascular work. The instrument appeared in her hand. She guided it with millimeter precision, using the fluoroscopy for real-time positioning. The fragment was ferromagnetic. The probe would attract it, allow her to draw it away from the cardiac tissue without direct contact. The room held its breath. Leah's hand was absolutely steady. The probe touched the fragment, held. She drew it back with glacial slowness, watching the screen, feeling the resistance through her fingertips. The fragment moved, 1 millimeter, 2, 5, 10. It cleared the epicardium. Got it. She withdrew the probe, the fragment secured, and placed it in the evidence container with the others. The most dangerous piece was neutralized, but the surgery wasn't finished. There were still 16 other fragments to remove, tissue damage to repair, bleeding to control. What should have been a 6-hour procedure was already at the 90-minute mark, and Lena was nowhere near done. Blood pressure dropping, Meta called. 90/50. He's bleeding somewhere we haven't identified yet. Suction. I need visualization. The surgical field cleared. Lena's eyes scanned the exposed tissue with systematic precision. There, a small arterial bleed, hidden behind fascia. She clamped it, tied it off, moved on. Pressure stabilizing. 100/60. Good. Continuing with fragment removal. In the gallery, a fourth-year resident leaned toward his colleague. She's been operating for 90 minutes. Her hands haven't shaken once. Combat surgeons learn to operate for hours under conditions we can't imagine, Captain Reese said, his voice carrying in the quiet space. I've seen field surgeons work for 18 hours straight during mass casualty events. This is what they're trained for. This is what she's trained for. Aldridge turned to look at him. You're sure you've seen her before? Absolutely certain. Helmand Province, 2019. She was part of a special operations surgical team attached to our unit. Officially, they weren't there. Officially, that field hospital didn't exist. But unofficially, she saved 11 lives in 3 days, including my platoon sergeant, and a Marine who'd been declared dead twice. Declared dead twice? No pulse for 4 minutes. She brought him back. Used some technique I'd never seen before. Afterward, she told us it was classified. She told us we'd never see it used in a civilian setting because it was too aggressive, too risky. But it worked. Below, Lena continued extracting fragments. 14 removed. 15. 16. Each one catalogued, each extraction performed with the same careful precision. Last fragment, she announced, located in the deltoid muscle away from major vessels. This one's straightforward. She removed it in less than 30 seconds. All fragments accounted for. Beginning closure of the thoracotomy. Dr. Chen, prepare the chest tube. Dr. Mehta, how's our cardiac rhythm? Normal sinus, rate 72. No irregularities. Excellent. Lena began the closure. Layer by layer. Pleura. Intercostal muscles. Fascia. Subcutaneous tissue. Skin. The same interrupted sutures that had marked all her work. The ones that identified her as clearly as a signature. Total surgical time. 2 hours and 37 minutes. In the gallery, no one spoke. They'd just witnessed something that would be discussed in surgical conferences for years. A procedure that shouldn't have been possible. Performed by someone who shouldn't exist, with results that defied standard medical training. Lena stepped back from the table, stripped off her gloves, looked up at the gallery one more time. Patient is stable. Prognosis is good. All fragments removed. No cardiac involvement. He should make a full recovery. She walked out of the OR without another word. Aldridge found her in the scrub room, hands under the water, staring at nothing. That was extraordinary. She didn't respond. Lena, I need to understand, not just what you are, but why you're here. Why a surgeon with your skills is working as a first-year resident. Why you're hiding. I'm not hiding anymore. Then what are you doing? She turned off the water, dried her hands with methodical care. When she finally looked at him, her eyes carried a wariness that had nothing to do with the surgery. I'm trying to figure out if I can be a doctor without being a weapon. I'm trying to learn if the skills I developed to save lives in war zones can translate to saving lives in peace. I'm trying to discover if the person I became in those 8 years is who I actually am, or if there's someone else underneath all that training. And what have you discovered? That I can't separate them. The weapon and the doctor. They're the same person. And I'm not sure if that's something to accept or something to fight against. Before Aldridge could respond, the door opened. Agent Torres entered, her expression unreadable. We need to talk, she said to Lena. About Crimea. About what really happened that night. About why you've been carrying guilt that was never yours to carry. Lena's shoulders tensed. Now? Now. Because what you need to understand changes everything. Torres led them to an empty conference room on the 4th floor. She posted 2 agents outside the door. Then activated a signal jammer from her briefcase. Whatever she was about to say, she wanted no record of it. Aldridge started to leave. Torres stopped him. You should hear this too, Doctor. You're about to be offered something significant, and you need to understand who you're working with. She opened a classified folder marked with the kind of stamps that made Aldridge's security-naive eyes widen. Photos, documents, mission reports with entire paragraphs redacted in black. Crimea, November 2021, Torres began. A joint CIA State Department operation to extract a Ukrainian intelligence officer who'd been compromised. The officer had information about Russian troop movements 3 months before the invasion. Critical intelligence. Time-sensitive. Dr. Kirova was part of a 4-person team. 3 field operatives, 1 medical officer. Lena sat perfectly still, her face carved from stone. The extraction went wrong. The safe house was raided. Gunfire. Casualties. In the chaos, a U.S. diplomat attached to the Kyiv embassy was shot. Abdominal wound. Severe bleeding. Lena performed emergency surgery in a basement under fire while Russian security forces searched the building above. Torres pulled out a photo. Grainy, low light, taken from a body camera. It showed Lena's hands inside a man's abdomen, blood everywhere, her face illuminated by a single tactical flashlight. She worked for 43 minutes. The diplomat died on her table. The official report stated that the wounds were too severe, the conditions too hostile. Tile, the outcome inevitable. Lena was cleared of any wrongdoing, but she blamed herself. She resigned 6 weeks later. I couldn't save him, Lena said quietly. I had the skills, I had the training. I had everything except the ability to make it matter. No, Torres said, what you didn't have was a chance. She pulled out another document, a toxicology report dated 3 weeks ago. The diplomat's body was returned to the U.S. and buried with full honors. Standard procedure. Case closed, except last month, his widow requested a second autopsy. She wanted closure, wanted to understand exactly what killed her husband. Torres slid the report across the table. The pathologist found traces of a synthetic coagulation inhibitor in his system, a compound developed by Russian intelligence services. It prevents blood clotting at the molecular level. Once it's administered, no amount of surgical skill can stop the bleeding. The victim bleeds out no matter what you do. Lena's hands ripped the table edge. He was poisoned before we even reached the safe house, by someone in his own security detail. The FSB had an asset embedded in the embassy staff. They didn't just compromise the extraction. They murdered their target and made it look like battlefield medicine failure. The room went silent. Aldrich looked at Lena's face and saw something breaking open. 3 years of guilt. 3 years of believing her hands had failed. 3 years of trying to become someone different because she thought she'd proven herself inadequate when it mattered most. You were set up, Torres continued. The agency suspected it at the time but couldn't prove it. The autopsy evidence changes everything. You didn't fail him, Lena. You never had a chance to save him. No one did. And the fact that you tried, under those conditions, for that long, while enemy forces were hunting you, is exactly why your codename is still active in our system. Lena's voice came out barely above a whisper. Why didn't you tell me this 3 years ago? Because we couldn't prove it. Because the investigation was classified above your clearance level. Because you'd already resigned and we had no legal authority to share intelligence with a civilian. And because, honestly, we thought you deserved the peace of walking away. Peace. Lena laughed, but there was no humor in it. I haven't had a peaceful night's sleep since Crimea. I know, and I'm sorry, but you need to hear this now, because Metropolitan General's Board of Directors is going to offer you something unprecedented. They're going to ask you to stay, not as a first-year resident, but as a senior trauma attending. They're going to propose that you establish a tactical medicine training program, integrating combat surgical techniques into civilian emergency care. Aldridge's eyes widened. How do you know that? Because I suggested it to them 2 hours ago. Because what Lena just did in that operating room saved a life that will prevent attacks on American soil. Because the techniques she used need to be taught, documented, integrated into standard trauma protocols. And because she's wasted as a first-year resident pretending to be someone she's not. Torres looked directly at Lena. You tried to run from who you are. You tried to become a different person, but today proved that the surgeon you became in the field and the surgeon you want to be in civilian life aren't different people. They're the same person, and that person is extraordinary. Lena stood abruptly, walked to the window. Outside, the city continued its normal rhythm. Traffic, pedestrians, people living lives that didn't involve classified operations or midnight extractions or carrying the weight of debts that weren't their fault. I don't know if I can do this, she said. You just did it, 2 hours ago, with a gallery full of witnesses. That's different. That was an emergency. That was necessity. Creating a program, teaching others, putting my name and face on something official. That's choosing to be that person, permanently. Aldridge spoke for the first time since Torres had started talking. When you applied here, you wrote in your personal statement that you wanted to practice medicine that mattered. That you wanted to make a difference in people's lives at their most vulnerable moments. You said you believed that everyone deserved a doctor who would fight for them when they couldn't fight for themselves. Lena turned to face him. I remember reading that statement and thinking it was the most earnest, naive thing I'd seen in years. But watching you work today, I realized it wasn't naive at all. It was the truth. You've been fighting for people your entire career. The only difference is the uniform you wear while doing it. I lied to you, to everyone. About my age, my experience, my background. Yes, and if you stay, we'll need to address that formally. But lying about credentials is a different category of problem than lacking competence. You have more competence than anyone I've ever worked with. The question is whether you're willing to stop hiding it. Torres closed her folder. The board wants to meet with you tomorrow. They're going to offer you senior attending status, full surgical privileges, and funding to develop a trauma training program based on your expertise. They're also going to offer you complete autonomy in how you run it. No oversight beyond standard hospital protocols. No questions about where you learned what you know. And in exchange, you stay. You teach. You save lives using every skill you have. And you stop punishing yourself for a death that was never your fault. Lena looked at the toxicology report still lying on the table. 3 years of her life had been shaped by the belief that her hands had failed when it mattered most. 3 years of second-guessing, of hiding, of trying to become someone smaller and safer. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow morning. But Lena, before you decide, you should know that Mikhail Volkov is conscious. He's asking to see you. He wants to thank the surgeon who saved his life. Maybe you should start there, with the person you did save today, instead of the one you couldn't save 3 years ago. Torres left, taking her classified documents and her signal jammer with her. Aldridge remained. Whatever you decide, he said quietly, I want you to know that watching you work today changed how I think about medicine. I've spent 30 years believing that good surgery comes from careful adherence to protocol, from following established procedures, from staying within defined boundaries. But you showed me something different. You showed me that sometimes the best medicine comes from being willing to break every rule in service of the only rule that matters: save the life in front of you. Even if it means having someone on your staff who lied about who they are. Especially then, because the person you pretended to be and the person you actually are both have the same goal. And that goal is what makes someone a real doctor, not their credentials or their history. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think you should take the offer. Not because we need you, though we do, but because I think you need to stop running from the person you've proven yourself to be. Lena stood outside Mikhail Volkov's recovery room for 3 full minutes before entering. Through the observation window, she could see him awake, alert. An SBI agent sitting in the corner, monitoring everything. The man whose life she'd saved. The man who represented everything she'd tried to leave behind. She pushed open the door. Volkov's eyes tracked to her immediately. He was younger than she'd expected. 28, barely older than some of the residents. But his eyes carried the kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with age. Dr. Kurova, he said in accented English. They told me your name. They told me what you did. How are you feeling? Like someone removed 17 pieces of metal from my chest, which I understand is exactly what happened. He smiled slightly. Also like I am alive when I should not be. The doctors before you, they said I would not survive transport to surgery. But you disagreed. I've seen worse cases survive. In hospitals like this? In places that weren't hospitals at all. Volkov studied her face with the kind of assessment that came from his own training in reading people. You have done this before, many times, in places you cannot speak about. Something like that. I was GRU once, Russian military intelligence, before I understood what my country had become. Before I decided some things matter more than loyalty to corrupted leadership. He paused, managing his breathing carefully around the chest tube. I recognize the look in your eyes. The weight of things done in service of beliefs that seemed clear at the time, but grow complicated in memory. Lena pulled up a chair, sat. Why did you defect? Because I learned my unit was planning attacks on civilian infrastructure in the West. Power grids, water treatment facilities, places where failure means innocent deaths. I told myself for years that intelligence work was abstract. Information, analysis, strategy. But this was different. This was murder disguised as military operation. So you contacted the CIA? And nearly died for it. The man who shot me was Konstantin Fedorov. We trained together. He was my friend, or I thought he was. He was actually FSB counterintelligence. He had been watching me for months. The FBI. FBI agent in the corner shifted slightly. Lena knew he was recording everything, cataloging every piece of intelligence Volkov revealed. The information you're carrying, she said. Is it worth your life? That is a question I have asked myself many times, but today, in that operating room, you answered it for me. You fought to save me when others would have declared me lost. That means you believe every life has value worth fighting for, even mine. Even a former enemy intelligence officer who brings nothing but complicated history. I fought for you because you're a person, not because of your history. Exactly. And the information I carry will save other persons, many of them. So yes, it is worth my life. And thanks to you, I still have my life to offer. Lena stood to leave. Volkov's voice stopped her. Dr. Kirova, I do not know your full story. I do not know why someone with your skills works as first-year resident. But I know the face of someone running from their past. I wore that face for 18 months while planning my defection. It is exhausting work, pretending to be someone smaller than you are. And when you stopped running, I discovered I was more than the sum of my worst choices. I discovered that skills developed in darkness can be used to create light. I think perhaps you are discovering the same thing. The FBI agent cleared his throat. Ma'am, we need to keep this visit short. Mr. Volkov needs rest. Lena nodded and left. In the hallway, Dr. Priya Mehta was waiting. There you are. The board wants to see you, right now. Conference room A. Torres told you. Torres told everyone. The entire hospital is talking about it. CIA officer, turned resident, turned hero surgeon. You're going to be famous whether you want to be or not. I don't want to be. Too bad. You saved a life today using techniques that will change how we approach trauma care. That's not something you get to hide. They walked together toward the administrative wing. Other staff members they passed stared, whispered. Some smiled with genuine warmth. The secret was out. There was no going back to anonymity. The boardroom held 7 people. Hospital CEO, Chief Financial Officer, Chief of Medicine, 3 board members, and Aldridge. The CEO, Margaret Chen. A woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and sharper instincts stood as Lena entered. Dr. Kirova, thank you for joining us on such short notice. Please, sit. Lena sat. Priya remained standing by the door. We've spent the last 3 hours reviewing your file, or rather what little file we have. We've also spoken with Agent Torres, with Dr. Aldridge, and with several of the residents who witnessed your work today. What we learned is extraordinary, and frankly, unprecedented. Margaret pulled out a formal document. We're prepared to offer you a position as senior trauma attending, effective immediately. This would include full surgical privileges, a seat on the trauma department leadership team, and an annual salary commensurate with your experience level, which we now understand is substantial. She slid the document across the table. The salary figure made Lena's eyes widen slightly. It was 4 times what she'd been making as a resident. Additionally, we want you to develop and lead a tactical medicine integration program. You would design curriculum, select teaching faculty, determine which techniques from combat medicine can be safely and effectively incorporated into civilian trauma care. We're prepared to fund this program with an initial budget of $2 million. Why? Lena asked. Why invest this much in something untested? Because what you did today will save countless lives if it can be taught and replicated. Because our trauma outcomes lag behind military field hospitals, despite having vastly superior resources. Because you represent a bridge between 2 worlds of medicine that have never effectively communicated. And because, frankly, Dr. Kirova, you're the most competent surgeon this hospital has seen in decades. Aldridge spoke up. The board has 3 conditions. First, you submit to a full credential review. We'll verify your medical degree, your training, everything. We need documentation to satisfy legal requirements, even if some of that documentation requires federal clearance to access. Understood. Second, you agree to full transparency with your trauma team. No more secrets. They need to know who they're working with and learning from. Agreed. Third, you commit to at least 3 years. This isn't a short-term project. Building a program of this scope requires sustained presence and leadership. We need to know you're not going to disappear the moment things get difficult. Lena hesitated. 3 years. It felt like forever and no time at all. 3 years ago, she'd walked away from the agency carrying guilt she now knew was undeserved. 3 years from now, who would she be? I need to add my own conditions, she said. Margaret nodded. We expected that. Go ahead. First, I want Dr. Priya Mehta as my deputy director for the tactical medicine program. She has military family background, she understands both worlds, and she's already proven she can keep pace with advanced techniques. Priya's sharp intake of breath was audible from the doorway. Second, I want the program open to any medical professional who wants to learn, regardless of their current position or institution. Residents, nurses, paramedics, even medical students. If they're willing to learn, I'm willing to teach. That could create liability issues, the CFO said. That could save lives, Lena countered. Medicine shouldn't be restricted by institutional boundaries. The techniques that matter need to spread as widely as possible. Margaret considered this. We can structure it as a regional training center with appropriate liability waivers and insurance coverage. Next condition? Third, no classified cases without my explicit consent. I left the agency for a reason. I'm willing to consult on federal matters when necessary, but I won't be an on-call CIA asset disguised as a hospital employee. Agent Torres already addressed that with us. The agency respects your boundary. No request, never demand. And finally, I want regular psychiatric support for any medical professionals struggling with trauma-related stress. Combat medicine leaves marks. If we're going to teach these techniques, we need to address the psychological cost of using them. The room went quiet. Margaret exchanged glances with the other board members. That's a remarkably mature understanding of the burden you're proposing to share. It's an understanding earned through experience I wish I didn't have. Margaret stood, extended her hand. Then we have an agreement. Welcome to the senior staff, Dr. Kirova. Or should I say, welcome back to yourself. Lena shook her hand. The document was signed. The transformation was official. As the meeting concluded and people filed out, Aldridge approached her. I owe you an apology. When I questioned your scars this morning, when I doubted your skills, when I assigned you to observation as punishment, I was being exactly the kind of physician I claim to despise. I let my assumptions about credentials override evidence of competence. You were protecting your patients and your department. That's what good chiefs do. Good chiefs also recognize extraordinary talent when it's standing in their scrub room. I failed that test. I won't fail it again. He paused at the door. Tomorrow morning, I want you to present at Grand Rounds, the entire surgical department. Tell them your story. Not the classified details, but the journey. Help them understand that excellence comes from unexpected places and that the path to becoming a great physician isn't always linear. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. You performed an impossible surgery in front of a gallery full of witnesses. You're ready. 2 weeks passed. The formal announcement of the tactical medicine program made regional news. Applications flooded in from across the country. Lena's first training cohort was selected. 20 medical professionals ranging from third-year residents to veteran trauma nurses to paramedics with decades of field experience. The program launched on a cold Monday morning in February. Lena stood in the simulation lab, looking at faces eager to learn, and felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Purpose. Not the abstract purpose of trying to become someone different, but the concrete purpose of being exactly who she'd always been, in service of something larger than herself. Welcome, she said, to the intersection of combat medicine and civilian care. What you'll learn here will challenge everything you think you know about trauma treatment. Some of it will seem aggressive. Some of it will seem risky. All of it is designed around one principle. When someone is dying, conventional wisdom is a luxury we can't afford. She pulled up the first slide, a battlefield photograph, sanitized of identifying details, showing a field surgical setup that looked nothing like a hospital. This is where I learned medicine, in places where the only resources were what we carried, where time was measured in heartbeats, where every decision was life or death with no room for error. Today, we're going to start translating that experience into techniques you can use, not because we want to militarize civilian medicine, but because the boundary between those two worlds has always been artificial. Medicine is medicine. Saving lives is saving lives. Vez, the context changes. The commitment doesn't. In the back of the room, Aldridge watched alongside Captain Reese, now recovered enough to attend as a guest observer. Priya sat in the front row, tablet ready, already taking notes. And in that moment, Lena Karova stopped running from who she was and started teaching others to be better than she'd ever been. 6 months later, the conference hall at Metropolitan General overflowed with people. 200 medical professionals from 17 states had gathered for the Tactical Medicine Integration Symposium, the first national presentation of Lena's program results. The statistics displayed on the screen behind her told a story that even skeptics couldn't dismiss. Trauma survival rates at Metropolitan General had increased by 31%. Average time to critical intervention had decreased by 18 minutes. Surgical complication rates had dropped by 40%. 12 other hospitals had adopted modified versions of the program protocols. But Lena wasn't looking at the statistics. She was looking at the faces. Residents who'd learned to trust their instincts. Nurses who'd discovered techniques that gave them tools they'd never had before. Paramedics who now performed field interventions that used to wait for hospital arrival. A ripple effect of knowledge spreading outward, saving lives she'd never see in places she'd never visit. Dr. Priya Mehta stood beside her at the podium, co-presenting the 6-month outcomes data. Together they built something that transcended individual achievement. A framework for integrating combat medical wisdom into civilian practice without sacrificing the humanity that made civilian medicine different. The key principle, Priya explained to the audience, is aggressive intervention tempered by ethical oversight. Combat medicine teaches us to act decisively in the face of uncertainty, but civilian medicine reminds us that every intervention has consequences beyond the immediate emergency. Dr. Karova's program creates space for both approaches to coexist. Lena advanced to the next slide, showing a case study. A 53-year-old construction worker with a penetrating chest injury similar to Captain Reese's, treated by one of their program graduates at a hospital 200 miles away. Survival where conventional protocols would have resulted in death or severe disability. This patient never knew that the technique used to save him originated in a battlefield hospital in Kandahar. He doesn't need to know. What matters is that knowledge learned in the worst circumstances found its way to benefit someone in completely different circumstances. That's the goal. Not to glorify combat medicine, but to extract lessons that transcend her origin. After the presentation, people swarmed with questions. Hospital administrators wanting to establish similar programs. Military medical officers interested in reverse integration of civilian techniques into combat care. Medical students asking about training pathways. Lena answered them all with patience she'd cultivated specifically for this purpose. She'd learned that teaching meant repeating yourself, meant meeting people where they were, meant accepting that change happened slowly and unevenly. Dr. Marcus Aldridge found her during the lunch break. 6 months of working together had transformed their relationship from suspicion to mutual respect. He'd become one of the program's strongest advocates. The Department of Defense called this morning. They want you to design a national trauma curriculum for military to civilian medical transition programs. They're offering substantial funding and full institutional support. How substantial? $8 million over 3 years, with potential for expansion if outcomes continue tracking positive. Lena exhaled slowly. That's not a program. That's a movement. That's exactly what it is. And you're positioned to lead it. The question is whether you want to. She looked around the conference hall. 6 months ago, she'd been a first-year resident trying to hide from her past. Now she was being asked to reshape how 2 massive medical systems fought about trauma care. The scale was dizzying. I need to think about it. Of course, but Lena, I want you to consider something. You spent 3 years punishing yourself for a failure that wasn't yours. You've spent 6 months building something extraordinary out of the skills you developed during that time. Maybe the point isn't to choose between those 2 versions of yourself. Maybe the point is to realize they were always the same person, just finally doing the work they were meant to do. Before she could respond, a young resident approached hesitantly. Male, late 20s, with the kind of posture that spoke of military. Literary background poorly hidden. Dr. Karova, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm Jake Harrison, second-year surgical resident at Portland General. I heard your presentation. I wanted to thank you. For what specifically? For making it okay to not hide anymore. I'm former Army medic, 3 tours in Afghanistan. I buried that on my residency application because I thought hospitals wouldn't take me seriously. Thought they'd see me as too aggressive, Too tactical. Not civilian enough. But watching your program, hearing you talk about integrating rather than separating these skills, I realized I've been making myself smaller for no good reason. Lena smiled. She'd heard versions of this story a dozen times now. Show me your sutures. Jake looked confused, but pulled out his phone, showed her photos from a recent appendectomy he'd performed. Perfect interrupted sutures. Military spacing. Combat-tested technique. Those are excellent. Stop hiding them. Medicine needs what you learned. The patients you'll treat deserve the full range of your skills, not the diminished version you think makes you more acceptable. Jake's eyes welled up. Thank you. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that. After he left, Priya approached with her tablet. We have a problem. Good problem, but still a problem. We've received 247 applications for the next training cohort. We have space for 30. Then we expand the program. With what resources? With the Defense Department funding if I accept it. With partnerships with other institutions. With a train-the-trainer model that lets us scale beyond what I can personally teach. This was never supposed to be about me being the only one who knows these techniques. It's about creating a network of practitioners who can teach each other. Priya grinned. So you're accepting the DoD offer? I'm considering it very seriously. But first, I need to visit someone. 2 hours later, Lena stood in Mikhail Volkov's apartment. He'd been released from witness protection into a supervised independence program. The FBI still monitored him, but loosely. He'd provided everything he knew. His intelligence had already prevented 2 infrastructure attacks and led to the arrest of 17 FSB operatives working in the United States. He looked healthier than she'd ever seen him. The pallor was gone, replaced by pallor that spoke of someone learning to live rather than merely survive. Dr. Kirova, I wondered when you would visit. I wanted to wait until you were truly settled. How are you feeling? Alive. Still strange to say after so many months of expecting death. The scars hurt sometimes, but the physical therapist says that is normal. He gestured to his chest, where her surgical incisions had healed into thin white lines. I think of them as reminders. Of what? That I made the right choice. That the information I carried was worth the risk. That on the other side of every dangerous decision is the possibility of something better. He pulled out his phone, showed her a photo. A young woman, early 20s, dark hair, bright smile. My daughter, Anya, she lives in Kiev with her mother. I have not seen her in 3 years. Since before my defection. But last month, the State Department approved protected video calls. She knows what I did. She knows why I did it. She told me she was proud of me. His voice broke slightly on the last words. That is worth more than any intelligence assessment. To have your child say they are proud of you. To know that the choice you made, the danger you accepted, resulted in something beyond survival. In meaning. In legacy. Lena sat down across from him. I came to tell you that the work I do now, the program I've built, exists because you survived. Because saving you reminded me that every life carries implications beyond itself. Your survival meant information that prevented attacks. But it also meant a daughter who still has a father. A man who gets another chance to build something better than what he left behind. We are alike in this way, Volkov said. Both of us running from versions of ourselves we thought were corrupted by the work we did. Both discovering that those skills, that experience, that knowledge, can be transformed into something that creates, rather than destroys. When did you figure that out? When I woke up after surgery and realized I was alive. That you had used skills learned in violence to prevent my violent death. That what matters is not where knowledge comes from, but what we choose to do with it. They talked for another hour. About recovery, about rebuilding, about the strange experience of living openly after years of secrecy. When Lena finally left, she felt something settle in her chest. A certainty that had been forming for months but hadn't fully crystallized until now. She called Margaret Chen from her car. I'm accepting the Defense Department offer, but I have conditions. Of course you do. What are they? The program stays based here at Metropolitan General. I'm not moving to Washington or some military installation. If they want my expertise, they work around my location. Agreed. Next, Dr. Mehta becomes co-director with full authority and equal salary. This can't be dependent on me. It needs infrastructure that survives if I get hit by a bus. Morbid but practical. What else? We establish a scholarship fund for military veterans pursuing civilian medical careers. Full tuition, living expenses, mental health support. We remove every barrier that makes people like Jake Harrison think they have to hide who they are to succeed in medicine. Margaret was quiet for a moment. That's going to be expensive. That's going to be essential. And I'll fundraise for it personally if I have to. These are the people who already understand the principles we're teaching. They're force multipliers. We need them in the system, not hiding from it. I'll take it to the board. But Lena, you realize what you're building here is bigger than a training program. You're reshaping how we think about medical expertise, about the value of unconventional experience, about the artificial boundaries we've created between different types of healing. I'm just teaching people to save lives using every tool available. The rest is commentary. 3 months later, Lena stood in the surgical simulation amphitheater, watching 20 new trainees practice advanced airway techniques. Priya supervised one group, while a former Navy corpsman who joined as associate faculty worked with another. Her phone buzzed, a message from Captain Reese, now completely recovered and back on active duty. A photo of him with his platoon, all of them healthy, alive, continuing their service. The text read, "Your techniques are being taught at Marine Corps combat medicine courses now. You're saving lives you'll never see. Thank you." Another message, this one from Jake Harrison. A surgical success story. A patient saved using tactical medicine principles in a civilian trauma bay. It works. Everything you taught us works. Thank you for showing me I didn't have to choose. Aldridge appeared beside her, watching the trainees with satisfaction. You know what the chief surgeon said when you first arrived? He said your hands weren't normal. That you moved like someone with experience no first year should have. I remember. He was right. Your hands aren't normal. They're extraordinary. And now, instead of hiding that, you're teaching others to develop the same capability. That's the difference between talent and legacy. Below them, a trainee successfully performed a procedure that would have been considered too advanced 6 months ago. The instructor called out praise. The other trainees applauded. Lena's pager went off. Trauma alert. Multiple casualties from a highway accident. All available surgical staff to emergency. She looked at Aldridge. He nodded. They moved together toward the emergency department, where people were dying and needed someone who refused to accept that some things were impossible. Where protocols were guidelines, not limitations. Where every second mattered, and conventional wisdom was a luxury no one could afford. Lena Tirova walked through those doors exactly as she was, not hiding, not pretending, not diminished. A combat surgeon who'd learned to practice in peace. A teacher transforming how medicine understood expertise. A person who'd finally stopped running from herself and started running toward the lives she could save. The monitor alarms were already screaming when she arrived. The trauma bay was chaos. A patient was crashing, vitals plummeting, conventional approaches failing. Everyone else hesitated, uncertainty freezing them in trained helplessness. Lena didn't hesitate. Her hands moved with that same impossible precision. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone who'd seen worse and refused to accept defeat. Her techniques deployed with the efficiency of knowledge earned in the hardest circumstances imaginable. And the patient who should have died didn't. Because sometimes the right person with the right skills shows up at exactly the right moment, not because of destiny or fate or cosmic intervention, but because someone decided to stop hiding who they were and start being who they'd always been meant to be. Dr. Lena Kirova, codenamed Scalpel, the surgeon who taught the world that excellence comes from unexpected places and that the path to greatness is never as simple as it seems. She was exactly where she was meant to be, just getting warmed up.